The wind dragged dust across the dirt road like dragging a memory through a grave. Late summer clung to the land with a dry stubbornness, everything brittle and sun-bleached, the kind of afternoon that felt hollow, like a church long after the hymn had ended. Colton Dade rode into Dalton Ridge beneath a pale sky, shoulders hunched, hat brim pulled low. The saddle creaked under his narrow frame. He hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days, but the horse he was riding had eaten less. His boots hit the earth with more weight than he carried in his bags. Folks around the edge of the trading post looked up, recognized the shape of him, then looked away again. He was familiar, but not welcome. He'd buried a wife, lost a child, and the land he still called a ranch was little more than weeds and wood out now. But he had a coin pouch tied tight in his coat and a thought circling his mind like a vulture. He needed a horse. Something young enough to pull, strong enough to haul water from the creek, and quiet enough not to remind him of everything he'd lost. The auction yard was crowded with traders and slack-jawed town folk. A preacher's boy hollered about salvation, while behind him a man in suspenders beat dust from a mule's flank. The scent of hay and horse sweat thickened the air. Colton moved past the wagons, scanning the stalls. That's when he saw them. 2 girls. Sitting still as fence posts in the shade of the auction fence. The older one, maybe 16, had a jaw too sharp for a child but eyes too tired for a woman. She wore a faded brown dress, torn at the sleeves, and her boots were mismatched, one a child's, the other worn to the sole. The little one leaned into her side, all straw-colored hair and dirt-smudged cheeks. Maybe 9, maybe 10. Clutching a tin cup like it might vanish. Colton paused mid-step. Something in their stillness stopped him. Like they were pretending not to exist. He turned to the mare in the auction pen, but the bidding had already begun. Men shouted numbers. The wind lifted the smaller girl's hair, revealing a welt near her ear. Colton turned back to the pen, tried to fix his eyes on the horse's withers. He'd come for work, not ghosts. Then he heard it. "Mister." A whisper, but sharp enough to cut. He turned. The older girl stood, her spine straight but fingers knotted in front of her. Her voice broke like a twig under a boot. "Please, take me instead." The crowd's noise didn't stop, but Colton felt like the world had folded in on that single sound. The trader beside him snorted. "Ignore her. Them girls been here all week. Ain't got a mama, and they won't say where the daddy's gone. Just trouble." Colton looked at her, really looked. The girl didn't blink. Her chin trembled, but her feet held. The little one rose beside her, eyes wide like someone watching a prayer sink into water. "I'll work," the older said. "Clean. Cook. Just don't leave us here." The trader waved a hand like swatting flies. "Go on now, begging don't suit no one." But Colton didn't move. He hadn't planned on anything more than a horse. Certainly not this. And yet something in him, some piece too buried to name, began to stir. He remembered the way his wife had once looked at him when the doctor walked out shaking his head. How her last touch had felt like both goodbye and forgiveness. That same look was in this girl's eyes. Hollowed out hope, waiting to be refused. "Do you have people?" Colton asked her. She shook her head once. "Just her. You from Dalton?" "Used to be. Not anymore." A pause stretched between them like the silence after thunder. He saw townsfolk start to glance their way. A woman leaned toward her friend, whispered behind a gloved hand. Colton turned back to the pen. "I'll take the dun mare," he told the trader. Coins changed hands. The horse was unhitched, her reins slapped into his calloused palm. He turned back to the girls, expecting them to have vanished like dust. But they were still there. "Y'all can ride with me," he said, not loud, not soft. "Ain't much back home. Just fence and dirt. But it's clean. And there's room." The younger one blinked up at him. The older girl didn't speak. Didn't smile. Just reached for her sister's hand and nodded once. They rode out of Dalton Ridge in silence. The mare pulled a small wagon behind, creaky and bare, but enough to hold the girls. Colton walked beside it, reins in hand, boots kicking up dirt. The sun dropped low in the sky, bleeding gold across the hills. Prairie dogs darted in and out of holes, and cicadas sang like old bones clattering in the trees. The silence wasn't heavy. It was waiting. An hour in, the little one dozed against her sister's side. The older girl held a piece of burlap over her shoulders, watching the road behind them like it might still decide to reach out and drag her back. "You got a name?" Colton asked. She hesitated. "Josie." He glanced at the younger one. "Annie." "Colton," he said, adjusting the reins. "Just Colton." The road dipped and rose again. Crickets began to sing. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote let out a yip and was answered by another. "Why'd you do it?" Josie asked suddenly. Her voice had the bite of someone unused to softness. "Do what?" "Take us." Colton stared ahead. "Didn't think I was." She looked confused. "I think you took me." The silence that followed was not the same. It wasn't long after that, when the ridge of his land came into view, faded fence posts, a leaning barn, and the outline of a house that once held dreams and now only held shadows. Josie stared at it without a word. Annie stirred, sleepy and soft. Colton walked slower. Then Josie said something so low he almost didn't catch it. "They said you left the church early? The day your wife died." He stopped walking. His hand clenched around the reins. The mare snorted. "I didn't want to hear the hymn," he said. She nodded. "Me either. Not since Mama passed." The wagon creaked forward another few paces. Colton exhaled, like letting out a ghost. The sun dipped behind the hills, leaving only the glow of lanterns inside the house. He hadn't lit those himself. Must have been the wind slipping through cracks, making something flicker. Or maybe, just maybe, something else was waiting for them inside. By the time the first frost clung to the window panes, Josie Bell knew how to split logs cleaner than most grown men. Her hands blistered and bled that first week, but she never whimpered. Not once. She moved through the house like someone afraid to disturb the dust. Annie, on the other hand, lit up corners like a flame trying to remember what warmth felt like. She sang while gathering eggs, hummed while drying spoons, her bare feet trailing mud across the floorboards. Colton didn't scold. He just cleaned up behind her and said nothing. The house began to smell like bread again. Burnt the first few tries, but by mid-October, the crust browned just right. Josie never took credit. She simply placed it on the table and sat with her hands folded, eyes lowered, waiting to be told it wasn't enough. Colton never said a word. He just passed the butter. On Sundays, when the town bell tolled, Colton sat on the porch sharpening a blade instead of heading to church. Annie would climb the post rails, giggling like the world hadn't broken her yet. Josie sat near the doorway with mending in her lap, pretending not to listen when Colton spoke softly about fence repairs and cow feed. The land was healing under his hands. Maybe the rest of them were too. But words spreads like smoke when it's stirred by shame. One chilly morning, a wagon creaked up the hill. 3 townsfolk stepped down, the preacher's wife, her face tight with righteousness, the blacksmith's sister, her arms crossed and lips pursed, and a boy of about 17, lean and red-cheeked, who had once tried to corner Josie behind the mercantile. Colton met them at the gate, coat open, rifle slung casual over his shoulder. He wasn't angry, but his stillness said enough. The preacher's wife stepped forward. "Mr. Dade, it's come to our attention there's concern about the nature of your household arrangement." Colton blinked once, slow as a winter sunrise. "Concern? The girls. It isn't proper. Folks are saying things." "Which folks?" The blacksmith's sister cut in. "You're keeping 2 young girls under your roof. Alone. No church oversight. No marriage. No family relation. That raises questions." Colton's eyes flicked to the boy, whose gaze dropped to his boots. "Josie's a worker. She chops wood, cooks meals, sees to her sister. I don't touch a hair on either head. And I sure as hell don't owe you explanation." The preacher's wife's voice turned syrup thick. "You might not owe us. But what about them? What about their reputations? You think anyone will take them in once rumors start? What if they're already ruined? Behind the half-closed door, Josie listened, her hands trembling over a patch of cloth she'd been stitching. Her cheeks burned. She turned to Annie and told her to go to the loft, voice tight with warning. When she stepped outside, the wind slapped her dress against her legs. Her braid whipped over her shoulder. Colton didn't turn, but his hand shifted closer to the stock of his rifle. Josie faced the townsfolk, shoulders squared like a soldier. No one asked you to come here. The preacher's wife's mouth parted. We're trying to protect you. You're trying to feel better about watching us starve when Mama died. You're trying to clean your conscience by dirtying mine. The boy flinched, a red welt blooming under his collar where Josie had slapped him a week ago for grabbing her wrist. His jaw tightened. You think this is where you belong? Living with him? What's he even giving you? Colton finally turned, the look in his eyes enough to silence thunder. She doesn't owe you answers. And you. He stared down the boy. Keep your tongue in your mouth or I'll plant it in the garden. The preacher's wife shook her head, defeated and flustered. This won't end well. Then they left, their wagon rumbling down the ridge, their judgment trailing behind like flies. Later that night, Josie sat by the fire. Her face was unreadable, like river ice hiding a current. Annie lay curled on a quilt, breathing softly. The flames snapped and hissed. Colton placed a log on the fire and stirred the embers. You did right, he said after a long silence. I said too much? You said what needed saying. Josie looked at her hands. Still feels like we're just surviving. He nodded, picking up his whittling knife. It does. Then, as if the air demanded a confession, she whispered, I thought you'd send us away. He paused, the wooden figure in his hand half-carved. I ain't never been the kind of man to take in strays. Josie tensed. But I'm trying real hard to be the kind that don't let 'em go once they're here. She didn't cry. Just nodded once, the corners of her mouth twitching like something almost dared to hope. That winter was a long one. Annie caught a fever. Shivered and burned in turns, cheeks red as wildfire. Josie didn't sleep for 3 days, sponging her down, whispering lullabies through cracked lips. Colton rode to town in sleet so thick it swallowed the sun, came back hours later soaked to the bone with medicine and honey from the widow in the hollow. When he collapsed by the stove, half frozen and shaking, Josie covered him with every quilt in the house. You're a damn fool, she said, brushing ice from his beard. He smiled under the blanket. Most things worth doing make a man look like one. When Annie's fever broke, Josie cried into Colton's chest for the first time. Not loud. Not with sobs. Just a slow, silent leak of everything she'd held inside since the day her world ended. Spring came quiet. Colton rebuilt the back porch. Josie planted herbs near the kitchen window. Annie fed a baby goat and named it Gospel. But Dalton Ridge didn't forget. One morning, a deputy came to the ranch. Said the sheriff was calling Josie into town. Formal complaint had been filed. The boy from the mercantile. Said she'd solicited him, then threatened him when he refused. Lies. Rotten ones. Colton's jaw clenched. Josie didn't argue. She rode into town on the mare they'd once tried to buy alone, now sleek and full of fire. She wore a clean dress. Annie's ribbon in her hair. Her chin high. They put her in front of the courthouse steps, eyes on her like arrows. The sheriff asked questions. Townfolk whispered. And then Colton arrived. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He walked through the crowd, every step louder than a sermon. She ain't guilty, he said. The sheriff raised a brow. And your proof? Colton turned to the townspeople. You know who I was. You saw me walk out of church when the hymn started. When grief made me hollow. These girls? They gave me something back I never thought I'd find again. And if you think shame is louder than that, you ain't ever lost what I did. The wind held its breath. Josie stared at him, eyes glassed with something between fury and awe. The sheriff sighed. Let her go. Back home, the three of them sat on the porch as evening settled in. Gospel bleated somewhere out back. The world was quiet. Josie turned to Colton, voice soft as candlelight. You never said why you didn't stay for the hymn that day. He didn't look at her. Just stared out at the dying sun. Didn't think I deserved it. She reached over, took his hand. And then, just as the sky turned violet, she hummed the first line. This time, he didn't walk away.